Ian Bremmer,
That's the story.
there's a pitch for downloading the book, but that aside, I want to give you a moment to respond to the idea of the G7 being a sunset platform, that the best days of just G7 are behind them, and respond to Kishore Mahbubani's point about if all the prognosis about China's doom is wrong, then in the next 5 to 10 years, the world will be looking at a very different kind of world order, which will be led and determined by China, he says.
I mean, it is surprising to see the level of willingness of Kishore to accept uncertainty around China, and I agree with him on that, and have such certainty around the idea that the G7 is history. I don't know where you get that level of certainty and lack of nuance about the United States and the core allies among the advanced industrial democracies. I'm impressed with that level of confidence. I just don't know where it comes from. I don't know that the G7 is history. I think the challenges that China faces and that the United States, as the world's largest economy, face are very different. The Chinese challenges are overwhelmingly about their economic system, about the stage of globalization, about their demographics, about state capitalism and its efficiency. The challenges in the United States are not economic challenges. They are political challenges, and they are perhaps equally dangerous and grave as China's economic challenges. It's not clear that the United States has a sustainable representative democracy. It's not clear that its citizens believe in America's political system or its allies believe in America's political system, the way it's not clear that Chinese believe in the Chinese economic system going forward. And I think that that's going to be the biggest question about the strength of the G7, is whether the Americans are prepared to continue to play a leadership role. What kind of outcome do we see from the 2024 U.S. election, which is a train wreck waiting to happen, and with very few signs of pushback domestically? So, I mean, clearly, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, something we haven't discussed yet, but that's been occupying the G7 very strongly, and not the G20, over the last 500 days, you have an enormous level of leadership and coordination among all of those allies. And it's even bringing Asian allies closer to the G7, closer to NATO as a consequence. Will that still be true in another 2 years? There's a huge uncertainty there, easily as big as the uncertainty as China's economic performance going forward. And I think we just don't know. I think we have reasons to be skeptical about the future trajectory of the G7. They are largely political, and they are similar in scope to the reasons we have to be skeptical about China's economic development. In both cases, big things need to change if we want to continue to see success. And right now, we're not seeing any assessment in the U.S. political system or in the Chinese economic system that those big changes are coming.
Let's spend a moment on the Russia-Ukraine war, Samir, because when we interviewed the Prime Minister for Business Today, one of the things he said is that, there are other issues on which there can be convergence. Amitabh Khan, the G20 Sherpa, said, let's focus on what unites us, not what divides us. However, the German Sherpa for the G20 has said, how can you have a G20 without spending substantial time, energy and effort talking about the Russia-Ukraine war? Do you see the dynamic playing out over the Russia-Ukraine war derail any attempt India may make to have a joint communique, to have tangible outcomes at the end of the G20 Leaders Summit? How should India be playing it on the back of the Sherpas meeting and right before the Leaders Summit begins?
Look, Rahul, as a host and as a platform provider for the G20, India has to, in many ways, find the sweet spot that allows all participants to feel that their viewpoint has been captured and reflected in the final communique, if it is to be signed by all. And here, it will have to use its persuasive powers to come up with a wording or a draft that works for all. Having said that, I think the G20, where the biggest countries sit, is a platform that over the years has confronted a few crises, right? it was shaped during the crisis. In many ways, the G20 was elevated to a leaders' summit in the midst of a crisis. And anything that impacts the globe, the G20 will have to deal with. So I think it's a fair thing to say that while it was not designed to be responding to a crisis such as the one that is unfolding in Ukraine, it has not been impervious to the implications of that conflict. And countries that are affected and countries that are indeed proximate to that conflict are going to be viewing the world and issues through that particular prism. And we have had to face those headwinds. I think India has done pretty well, as possibly Ian also acknowledged, that despite many issues and urgent and emotive interventions on this subject by many European and interlocutors from the Atlantic system, we have been able to still focus on questions of development, growth, climate, and other important issues. So the presidency has done well to take forward the discussions on matters that are important to everyone. It has, of course, also grappled with finding that wording that will that will work with both parties or both sides by describing the conflict in the communique and in various other statements. I hope we'll be able to find a resolution on that particular front and have a communique that comes out, because to me, as we head into that summit, this particular presidency has used the bully pulpit to shine a torch on what matters to 7 billion people who have not yet been served by global governments. If the world has, the globalization has served 1 billion people well, many Indian and Chinese amongst them, the next 7 billion need to be served. G20 is the best forum to do it. And I think the last 10 months of the G20 presidency have been spent on serving these 7 billion. One short point, Rahul, I must come in. I think the challenges for democracies like US and India is to create political convergence among societies so that the big national projects can be taken forward. The challenge for countries like China is to allow diversity and heterogeneity in their leadership. I think one of the biggest challenges to China's resilience is not just aging, but it's also the small coterie that is now running China under Xi Jinping. The Communist Party of China was able to create a diversity of views in their standing committees and in their leadership. The Chinese have eliminated that. The fragility of a single point of thinking is what is now playing out in China. I think Ian mentioned the COVID reopening or the post-COVID reopening of the economy. But you see the missteps coming in precisely because no one brings in a different thinking into that room where the emperor sits. And the emperor today has a lonely cabinet.